this is really an economic fight. I mean, part of the discussion we had on the Senate Commerce Committee today was about the fact that this is a commercial fight and a military fight. So we're competing in both realms. We got to be able to do both.
Bryan Clark is a senior fellow and director at the Hudson Institute's Center for Defense Concepts and Technology. He is an expert in naval operations, electronic warfare, and the future of military technology. With a distinguished career advising the Department of Defense, he continues to shape defense strategy and innovation.
What are your thoughts on hypersonics?
Hypersonics are actually not that great an investment. The issue being...
What about contested logistics?
Yeah, so contested logistics are something we look at.
You're knowledgeable about a wide range of topics, so I'm going to keep going. This is awesome. Lasers.
There are lasers that are out there, but we've kind of found that they have limited utility.
That's some good info. People love this All right, Bryan, welcome on.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be here.
You made the trek from Middleburg?
I made the trek over from Capitol Hill.
Oh, that's right. You're on the Hill today.
That's right.
You're on the Hill doing business.
Doing some business.
All right, talk to me about that.
Yeah, so Senate Commerce Committee was doing a hearing on trying to auction off more of the spectrum to give it to commercial telecom companies. And I was there to be the DOD kind of spokesperson to come in and make the case for defense as to why we need spectrum. Why do we need to keep some of it in the DOD's control and not give it away to the telecom companies?
Why do we need spectrum?
Well, so if we want to talk to drones, if you want to talk to each other, if you want to do sensing or jamming or any of that stuff, you got to be able to operate in the electromagnetic spectrum. Mm-hmm. And you see in Ukraine how their fight is mainly in the spectrum. I mean, those guys are going at it all the time.
Yeah.
Ukrainians at both sides have actually now started to use these fiber optic cable controlled drones because the jamming is so severe and because GPS is almost unavailable along the front lines. So, I mean, this Kursk incursion that Ukraine mounted, it was successful in large part because they were able to control the spectrum and keep the Russians from being able to talk to each other, coordinate the response, and it just turned into a mess on the Russian side.
Control the Spectrum sounds like a sweet band name or something. I like that. It's like Rage Against the Machine or something.
It is.
Okay,
it is, yeah.
So the spectrum, though, like aren't a lot of these drones doing like frequency hopping now, or like they don't even need to be on any certain band? Like
right, frequency hopping in a limited range. Usually, they don't. It can't go across like the entire daylight to DC kind of spectrum, but within a range, they will jump around. Once they receive, once they detect some jamming, they'll go somewhere else. But the jammers have gotten better too. So one Russian approach is just to basically barrage jam a whole bunch of frequencies, and then you got nothing. The other approach is to use AI and start predicting where you're going. So they'll try to get a sense of what your pattern is in terms of when you're jumping around frequencies. Does it seem like you go here or there? What's your algorithm for how you choose a frequency? So the AI jammer will start to go after those frequencies.
That makes sense. Okay, and so for the listeners, just taking a step back, so you're on the Hill doing this. Are you doing this on behalf? You're doing it on behalf of the DoD. So explain kind of like your job, or
no, I'm a think tanker.
Okay,
so I work at a think tank here in DC, the Hudson Institute. And I was there to talk about the defense needs for spectrum, but there was no DoD.
I see. So you're not really working for.
Right.
You're kind of like in between for the like the DoD, the industry, and Congress.
Right,
and kind of helping.
Right. So we're a public policy nonprofit that does research, sometimes on behalf of the government, sometimes on behalf of foundations, sometimes funded by donations from industry or people. Yep. So we're supposed to be an honest broker in terms of what do we think the analysis shows about, in this case, the utility of spectrum for military stuff.
And a lot of your analysis, we're excited to have you on because a lot of your thinking lately has been around like autonomous systems, right?
Right.
Like vehicles,
right,
or drones, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're doing studies for the Navy and the Air Force right now on future force design, meaning what does that future fleet look like? What's the future Air Force look like when you bring in uncrewed systems? Because that's fundamentally why we're there. We're looking at how do uncrewed systems change the way we fight? What's the cost profile? How does it affect our manpower requirements? So bring that in and kind of look at the whole soup to nuts implications of drones for military stuff.
Okay, cool. And so let's start with USV or unmanned surface vessels or unmanned surface vehicles, they call it. Let's start there.
It kind of depends on how big it is, right?
Okay.
So vehicles, if it's sort of smaller, more like your pleasure boat sized, and then it's a vessel if it's more like a ship sized.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's start with the smaller ones.
Yeah.
The vehicles.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about that market. Obviously, big news, fundraising announcement. Saronic just raised at what, pull up the article, $4 billion valuation. That's basically about the size of my company, so that's cool. It's like, that's pretty good.
They're doing pretty good. I mean,
$600 million. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So Then there's a bunch of other companies here too, like CSATs.
Right.
I'm trying to think of some other names.
Havoc.
That's another one.
Yep.
There's a couple of good ones.
Yeah.
So I want to let's talk before we talk about specific companies. Just high level, where do you see the unmanned surface vehicle market going?
I think it's gonna kind of explode. So what we're seeing in that we're doing a bunch of wargaming for Australia and Japan and for the U.S. looking at uncrewed vehicles. And uncrewed surface vehicles are hugely important, it turns out, in doing attacks against your enemy, right? So you can send these in like the Ukrainians have done, these attack boat raids, if you can get them close enough, or if your enemy gets close enough to you.
Yep.
So in Taiwan, they're looking at using these as part of this hellscape concept that the Indo-Pacific Command is looking to implement, where they basically put a bunch of these little boats in the water when it looks like China might invade, and they're just going to go after Chinese amphibious ships on their way in. And it's a pretty easy shot for them because the Chinese ships are coming at you. You just need to drive at them and explode. So it works great. So there's a huge need for them for that, and need lots of them. There's a need for them to do a decoying mission. So in missile defense, we're finding that if you get these attacks like we're seeing in the Red Sea, or even what some of Ukraine has had in the Black Sea, but just hundreds of missiles and drones coming at you, you've got to be able to, you can't shoot them all down, right? So you got to put some other decoys out there to attract those incoming weapons away from you. So if you want to survive, you got to put some sacrificial lambs out there, and those sacrificial lambs are these little drone boats. So these small USVs are going to be, I think, a huge market. They're already seeing some of the demand.
Okay, let's talk about it. Let's break it down like we're StarCraft players. Yeah. So we've got a lot of these boats coming at like a Chinese blockade or something, potentially.
Right.
Don't they just shoot them all?
Right. You try to. So the problem is they're small and they're fast in a lot of cases. So they're hard to hit.
But the guns are getting better.
The guns are getting better. Do you model that? Right. Oh, yeah, we definitely do. So the idea, though, is how many guns do you have, right? So you can only shoot one thing at a time with these guns.
Yeah.
And normally a ship will have a couple of those guns. So if you send 20 or 30 of these ships, these little boats, they're going to get there before you shoot them all. And so you only need one of them to make it through. If it hits the water line with a 500-pound bomb, it's going to, the seawater does the rest, right? So basically you put a hole at the water line and then all the seawater comes in, and then that's where the damage comes.
That makes sense. What about, a couple of comments. One, maybe a couple autonomous 50 cals could start ripping through these though.
They could. Now, if you put a bunch of them on your deck, right. So that's the way you deal with this, is you got to then scale up your defense to be able to do it in parallel. You can't just have a couple of guns operating serially trying to hit them all. Because
this is not a plug for Allen Control Systems, to be clear for the listeners. Not a plug.
I think it is.
Not a plug.
It's a plug.
No, we do not monetize the podcast.
Oh, okay.
No. Okay. So, all right. What about this though? Like, what about instead of just driving ships at the Chinese blockade, you just like shoot them with artillery, long range artillery? Like, why spend so much money on a boat just to detonate a boat? Those boats, can you pull up one of those Saronic boats? I want to see like the Corsair. Yeah. Or go to their site. These look expensive.
Yeah.
So like, why not just instead use like a artillery?
Right. So the idea would use you'd use the smaller ones, right? So you'd use like the Spyglass, which is the smaller version of the Saronic vessel, and so they're pretty cheap. You're getting down, or Havoc. Havoc's got them too. So they're getting down to the tens of thousands of dollars range.
Okay.
So they're cheaper than like an Excalibur round. So if you're thinking about an artillery, I'm going to shoot guided artillery at this thing. Well, the guided artillery round's like $100,000. So I can send a guided artillery round at this thing.
Whip that around.
For the same amount of money, I can send several of these boats.
Oh, here we go.
Of these little Spyglass at it.
For the people who listen on Apple Podcast and Spot and not video, we're looking right now at Spyglass by Saronic. Right. Looks pretty sick. What do you think? Yeah. What do you think, Jack? Yeah, looks pretty sick. Let's pull up a Havoc one too. Let's see a Havoc. I mean, why don't plug all these companies? Yeah. We're giving them all free marketing.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's actually part of the game.
It's all about the ecosystem.
Havoc,
helping each other. I think they're called Havoc AI.
Havoc AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? Havoc. When you search Havoc, Havoc the movie. Have you ever seen that movie? It's the original Anne Hathaway. If you're a fan of Anne Hathaway, it's one of her best movies. I recommend. It's very good.
Yeah, there you go. So
I don't know if you saw the Super Bowl, but she was like, she really memed. Everyone saw her. She's a big Eagles fan.
Oh, really?
Became a big X meme. Her like dancing, celebrating the domination of the Chiefs. Yeah.
Domination. That's for sure.
You got any pictures? I know Havoc has the boats. I've been talking to.
There's
Havoc.
a bunch of them.
Oh yeah, here we go. A couple of shots here. These look cool too.
Yeah.
So what's the differentiator with these companies? Like, how do they differentiate?
Yeah, so Havoc, their approach is these are cheap and expendable, and you buy them in really large numbers, and they build these at boat yards. So they contract with a bunch of commercial boatyards that build like fishing boats and ski boats and stuff like that, but they'll contract with a bunch of them simultaneously and just build these boats at scale. Saronic is more, going after a more sophisticated market, right? So they're building these in-house. They're, incorporating a lot of AI and a lot of new technology into them.
Mm-hmm.
The payloads they carry are in a lot of cases classified payloads for the Department of Defense. So signals intelligence and electronic warfare and stuff. So Saronic is a little bit different part of the market where you're going after that, high-end customer, whereas Havoc is more the scale. I just want to send drone boats to go attack my enemy ships.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're kind of tackling two different parts of the market.
Okay, and then we had a CSAT's fundraise. Pull that up, $10 million. They're a little smaller company. They seem to be going after, and correct me if I'm wrong here, they're like more dual use. I feel like they have some other things they're doing, right?
Right, absolutely.
So yeah, it looks like if you pull up one of their, is that the CSATs? Maybe.
Yeah.
That's actually good right there. These little boats here, they actually showed, they did a full unmanned voyage from like Australia to Hawaii, or I don't know where. It was a long one though.
Right. And so they're so Saronic and Havoc are both kind of looking at more tactical, right? They're using them for attacking the other guides' ships. They're using them to do maybe electronic warfare in some kind of inshore environment. So they're much more tactically focused. These guys are focused on sort of long-range surveillance missions, long-range or long-endurance surveillance and tracking missions. But you can use them for kinetic operations. You can put a warhead on them. So they're kind of, like you said, dual use. You can use them for a lot of different applications.
Yeah, and I think there's probably more companies too. We'll add in the show notes other ones we see. Also, I heard Anduril is probably getting into this market now because they got jealous from the Saronic fundraise. Right. They're like, me too, bro. I also do this.
Well, I think they see the market, right? The market for USVs. I mean, I'm serious. It's going to really explode in the next few years just because the Ukrainians have shown us how effective these can be at denying sea areas to your opponent. So I think Taiwan, Japan, the U.S., Australia, they're all looking at them.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think we should slap and again, this could be any company, not ACS, but like we should put on these boats, put an autonomous 50 cal, because then they can drive around autonomously and just savage things. Right.
So one of the other, maritime application or maritime applied physics systems, MAPS, builds the GARC, which is a kind of an old school version of these uncrewed vehicles, and they have put 50 cals on those GARCs.
Well, because if you're going to think about, you have like a USV swarm versus a USV swarm.
Right.
Like while you're heading at each other, you may as well shoot them.
Right.
Like,
Right. And if you're going to try to do a swarm attack against a ship, if you had guns on them, you're just going to make it that much harder for the ship to shoot at you. Yeah, you're now getting a hail of bullets, plus you got these drones coming.
I mean, it's a pretty scary water world.
Right. Yeah.
Did you ever watch that movie, Waterworld?
Yeah.
That's a good-ass movie.
That's some quality Kevin Costner entertainment.
I mean, I feel like completely underrated. I need to rewatch that, actually. That's pretty good. I think it was like it's set... Basically, there's like a part of the world that has land still, and they're looking for that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's the quest. It's a quest. Yeah.
It's a quest. A classic movie. All right. So we've got, this market's, it seems like it's kind of like Zerglings in StarCraft on the ground, but like in the water, and they're just coming. There's not much you can really do about it.
Right. We got to take them all out individually, which means you need automated guns. You could use high power microwave maybe to try to disable the electronics on them.
I don't know though. These are going to be pretty shielded.
But
these things are not like drones.
No, right, exactly. You can shield them because they're not weight limited in the same way that an aerial drone is. Yeah.
So then does the name of the game become production, I guess?
Yeah.
And I guess like I saw Saronic was going to like make a factory for this.
Right.
So is that's kind of what you're thinking about?
Yeah. Production ends up being the hard part because once you decide you need them in like the hundreds. And so right now with Replicator, the DOD is buying, some of these vehicles are in Replicator. So some of these USVs are in Replicator. But they're buying them in like the 10s or 20s, not in the hundreds necessarily for Replicator. But you got to get to the point where you can produce them at that scale because they're expendable in a lot of ways. I mean, that's the whole game of the game is you're going to use these to go attack an enemy and lose all of them. Your intent is to lose them all, hopefully in the course of killing something. So you need the military is going to have to buy them in the hundreds and at a good price because you can't afford to have these things sitting around if they're going to cost
I mean,
$50,000-$70,000 a piece.
Leave it to humans to find a way to put more litter into the ocean.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're going to be having boats at all kinds of these little things at the bottom of the sea.
That's right. The Taiwan Strait's going to get so full of this stuff that you're going to be able to walk across it at some point.
Yeah, but at least they got that unicorn valuation.
That's right.
That's
right.
Like, that's key. That's the important part.
Let's keep focused on what's important.
Valuation.
That's right.
Capitalism. All right, so let's switch gears to drones a bit. So war in Ukraine. Talk about first, I guess, talk about how the war in Ukraine shaped your think tank's views on stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's been pretty influential, like I said, on the electromagnetic spectrum. So, the work we've been doing on electronic warfare for the DOD really did get shaped quite a bit by what's happening in Ukraine. Because I think we really hadn't come to grips with what the impact would be from widespread GPS jamming, right? So we now have to think about entirely new approaches for navigation because GPS will be denied in anywhere near a target, right? So it's hard to jam GPS over wide areas, but you can certainly jam it anywhere close to a target. So you got to come up with some other way for that weapon to get an end game targeting solution. So thinking about navigation warfare is what we used to call this back in the Cold War. So that's one thing. Another thing is just the prevalence of downlink jamming against communication systems. So just you really can't get any sort of comm signal on the front lines right now in Ukraine. So these guys are having to basically operate in the blind continuously, not be able to coordinate with each other, having to go and use wired communications in a lot of cases. And then the last thing is decoys. So Ukraine really highlighted how effective decoys can be at causing your enemy to waste a bunch of weapons, slowing the enemy down, and just confusing them in terms of their battle planning. Because the Ukrainians have made this into an art, right? So they have decoys, visual decoys, as well as infrared and RF decoys for most of their systems.
Yeah.
So they put those out there, and the Russians waste weapons on them routinely. And the Russians also end up then wasting time, right?
Yeah.
Because you've a small number of long-range precision weapons. If you waste them on a false target, now I've got to figure out a different way to accomplish that task that was supposed to be opening up for me, right? So if I go out and kill what I thought was an artillery piece or a missile launcher that was going to allow me to move into a new area, well, I can't move into the new area now, and my operation is stalled.
Decoys,
huge thing, right? So, so when it comes to these drone boats, this is one of the primary purposes we see for them that the companies haven't done a great job of marketing them for. But I'll tell you, talking to the Japanese in particular, they're right next to China, right? So any fight they're in, they're facing hundreds to thousands of Chinese missiles from the homeland, from ships, from airplanes. And the only way to survive in that environment is to put a bunch of basically put a bunch of false targets out there that are going to suck up these weapons as they're coming in. Otherwise, you're the target, right? Otherwise, you're the only target out there if you're the ship or you're the shore unit.
Yeah, but Japan and China aren't going to fight. Come on, they don't have a history of that.
That's right.
What are you talking about?
I know, it's crazy.
That's crazy. Okay, so so decoys is actually I haven't heard that one, but that makes sense. I mean, we do think about that for our product too, just because like drone decoys, like you have, one has a payload, one doesn't.
Right.
You got to figure out which one.
Right. So do I have to kill them all? And this gets to like the whole drone boat problem, right? So if I have to kill every one of them, that's a hard problem. I have to make a big investment to be able to do that. And if half of them are decoys that don't really have an expensive payload, I'm going to probably waste a lot of effort in defeating them all. But because I can't tell which is real and which is just a kind of what unpayloaded.
Yeah, this actually makes this is a good point.
Target.
So we'll come back to drones in a second. I got to go back to the ships. So I was in the Navy. I don't know if you know. I was a naval officer. Worked at naval reactors.
Okay.
NAV CO8.
Oh, great. Okay.
So I worked at the headquarters for the nuclear Navy, basically, on the reactor.
I was I worked at I was a submariner. So
so you came through my program.
I did, and then I was the operations officer and the engineer of one of the ships down in Charleston that we use for training nuclear officers. So we were reported directly to NAVC for that.
Yeah, I love. We run our company like Admiral Rickover would run a tech startup. Just so you know, that's our culture. It's like the Rickover principles.
Awesome.
Like we're the devil's in the details.
Right.
Anyways, I bring this up because I wanted to ask, what do you think becomes of the carrier strike group then?
Yeah.
Like what happens?
Well, I think.
By the way, if I explain for our audience, the carrier strike group, let's explain a carrier strike group. Just Google it so you can see a picture for everyone.
Yeah.
And I'll explain it for the listeners too. Carrier strike group is a carrier.
Right.
I'm going to say a cruiser.
A cruiser, and then like five destroyers.
5 destroyers.
Five.
Wait, 5 now?
5.
2 Virginia class submarines?
So now we don't have the submarines with them all the time because we don't have enough submarines. So the submarines don't always go with the carriers. So
Man, things have changed since I was in the Navy.
Yeah.
Go up to a picture of it though. Yeah, that's a carrier.
There you go. Boom.
Okay. What becomes of this in the age of USVs?
So you have fewer of them, right? Because this thing is useful in peacetime and sort of the lead up to war, right? Because there's a lot of situations like this, the events in the Middle East, right? So I need to fly aircraft in the Middle East to go protect the airspace over Israel. I can't use air bases at a lot of the places there because the countries don't want to get involved, right? So, and I can't fly them out of Israel because now those air bases are under attack, right? So I got to come up with a way to get airplanes over Israel without relying on air bases in countries nearby. What we use that
for, obviously.
Right. So that works great in a kind of peacetime and sort of crisis response. But then once you get into a real big fight, this thing has to probably pull back because if you're going to fight China, this is target number one for all their anti-ship ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles. And this strike group will not be able to defend itself against the volume of fires that it will face unless it pulls back to 1,500 miles away from China. Well, then what do we do for the inside fight? How are we doing? That's going to be where these USVs come into play.
Yeah, it seems like that carrier is a sitting duck.
Right. So you got to pull it back enough to like, okay, you can do the kind of show of force and you can do the initial response maybe, but then when it looks like this is turning into a real war, we got to pull this out to where it's safe, and then we got to have other things that are able to continue the fight, which is why you need to pre-position these USVs in places like the Philippines and Taiwan and the Southwest Islands of Japan.
Yeah, and so we used to say this is for power projection. Right. That's what they taught us in ROTC.
Right.
It's hard to project power if you can't get that close. Yeah.
Right. So the mission is changing to be more about sea control over wide areas. Right. So we're doing some war games looking at the Indian Ocean in the future. This would work great in the Indian Ocean where I'm trying to control large areas of the ocean, prevent my opponent from harassing my allies or partners in places like the eastern coast of Africa. But if you want to go fight China in China's backyard, this is probably not the right tool to do that.
Yeah. Well, it looks awesome, though.
It does.
I mean, I feel like I'm proud to be an American when I see it. I'm like, this is badass. But I don't know in the modern war if it's not going to...
It's great. It's just because the modern war is not just the kind of high-end kinetic fight. There's a bunch of stuff that happens before it, and there's stuff that happens after it where this actually does help a lot. But you don't need as many of them, right? So if that's the case... Maybe I don't need 12. Maybe I can get by with 8 or 9, and then I free up that money to go buy.
So maybe the plan is like instead of building these big warships, we hear the thing that like we only build like 1.2 Virginia class submarines a year.
Right.
But maybe it's fine because we're actually about to ramp up production on small boats.
Exactly. Yeah. So you end up kind of rebalancing the fleet. So you have a smaller number of these bigger things that have a lot of people in them, and then a larger number of the smaller stuff that is mostly uncrewed, mostly unmanned.
Well, so then why are people like crying about our shipbuilding capacity when we're actually shifting it to something better?
Well,
maybe it's actually perfectly set up for what we want.
Right. I agree. And that's so the studies we've done and the reports that we've issued have said exactly that. Basically, we don't need to throw a bunch more money into the shipbuilding industrial base. It is kind of producing at the level we need to produce.
Because we're about to build something else.
Because we're going in a different direction. Right.
So what you're saying is the system might actually be working.
That's right. The system, despite our best efforts, is sort of working. It's keeping us in the right direction, even if we don't want to.
Yeah, just it's like really it's like splashy to like go after that China. China builds 30 ships to our one or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's a great way to make. If you're working in the industry, obviously you're going to do that to try to make sure you continue the funding. And if you're not really thinking about the future of warfare. This is the model you have in your head, right? So you're not. That's what you think has to happen. But if you actually look at this stuff and pay attention, this is the model. This is not the model for future warfare. This is the model for
last war.
Right.
Yeah. All right. I feel pretty good about our chances then.
Yeah,
we're on it. We got it. We got
That's right. That's right. You're at the edge of pushing this. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a little afraid about our drone production capacity though.
Absolutely.
Like, we can't really make these.
Yeah.
Like certainly not like this.
Right.
What do you guys think about that?
Well, no, you're right. So we need to build up that production capacity. So the problem, of course, has been the DOD hasn't been buying them in the volume that would prompt somebody to make an investment in that kind of production capacity. And that's why it's important that like Anduril and Saronic, and Havoc has their idea too. So
for some drones.
Right. All these companies are starting to invest in the production capacity using private money, saying, well, we'll make the investment to build the facilities and start infrastructure development. You, DOD, need to follow through and start buying the stuff when we're ready to produce it.
Yeah.
And I think with the new leadership in the DOD, you're going to see a lot more emphasis on, buying
drones and stuff.
Secretary Hegseth said he's going to shift 8% of the defense budget into drone or this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
new
got a
technologies.
real young gun in there.
Right. So 8% of the defense budget, you're talking about $70 billion, $70, $80 billion, depending on how you count it. So that's a lot. That could buy a lot. That can buy a lot of drones, right? So that's the idea, and that creates a demand signal. So now you see more companies jump into the fray, and start making their investments in infrastructure. But you're right. That is the problem. Is that if the DoD wanted to start building these today, they couldn't. Now the alternative is you do like Freedom's Forge, like in World War II, and we go to commercial facilities and build them. So you go to a commercial contract manufacturer that builds dialysis machines and car chargers and all that other stuff. There's a bunch of those in the U.S. There's like a dozen really big contract manufacturers in the U.S. that build refrigerators and parts for Northrop Grumman. And these companies could turn around and build drones if they got a design that you could build, like a modular design they can build in their facility, and then the orders from DoD. So so that's the other option that we're looking at, is this idea of contract manufacturers being a source of production capacity. So we got to design the stuff to be able to get built in these outside facilities.
That makes sense. I do think that there is one. I don't think the DoD can be a big enough buyer, probably.
Right.
Because what DJI did was they want a consumer, the worldwide consumer market.
Right.
That subsidizes a lot of R&D.
Yeah.
And makes their drones like really perfect.
Yeah.
So even if we do all of that, I still think we're probably like 10 years behind.
Yeah.
So.
Oh yeah. I mean, we are behind. And you're right, because the scale of DoD's demand signal is still going to be tiny compared to the commercial industry.
Yeah.
But
they're flying off Walmart shelves.
Yeah. But there's places they can go to try to get some production capacity if they want to spend some money, right? If they're willing to spend 20, 30, 40 billion dollars on drones of various kinds, companies will step up to build them, right?
Yeah,
they'll respond.
Yeah.
But right now there's no production capacity, even if you wanted to.
Yeah.
We got to do something to start establishing that capacity.
That's true. Actually, this is kind of going in a wild card direction here, but want to pull up the Unitree robot, the Unitree. I'm going to go, and the DJ. So I want to get your stance on this idea I had. So basically, I don't know if you've seen this thing. Yeah, just one of them.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, they're actually. I got quoted 16K. All right, check it out.
Wow,
16 grand. This thing, video. We could even throw a video up. Honestly, they're so sick. Okay, this is Chinese, and you've seen Tesla,
right?
And you've seen, look at this thing. 16 grand now, so cheap. You can buy one.
Wow.
And they actually are selling them. Like, I get hit by their sales team all the time.
Really?
They're trying to get me to buy them and put guns on them. they don't care.
Yeah.
Like, they're just like, bro, will you buy these robots from us?
That is amazing.
Okay, but check it out. So China is making these at 16K. They'll soon be 8K.
Yeah.
It's a 4.5 foot robot. So sick.
That's amazing.
And they're going to enter our market.
Right.
Just like DJI did.
Yep. And that's going to
What should we do? Do we allow that to happen?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think you got to say, you got to look for ways to get an advantage. So I think you either decide to buy them and say, I'm going to buy them for the purpose of using them against you at some point, or you don't let them come into the U.S. and try to deny them that market.
I think personally, we should get ahead of the DJI ban now and just probably not let them sell humanoids.
I think so. I think that's what you're going to have to do.
I mean, I'm not a politician, neither are you, but this seems like one of the things that's like, okay, we already saw this movie play out.
Right. Do we let this happen again now?
It's about to, because these guys will crush Tesla.
Right.
And
same
Optimus.
with BYD, right? So it's like a BYD and this company, if they come into the market, they're going to crush everybody that's here, and they're going to just use that money to amortize the next generation of technology development that goes into the military, because obviously through military civil fusion, this is all
But
shared.
right now, they are full bore selling this shit into people like me.
Yeah.
And I think I'm getting a couple. I'm gonna be real. Like, I'm like literally their salespeople are probably watching this. I'm like literally slamming them. We should ban you. And I'm like, also, by the way, I need 3 of them.
That's right.
So I can put guns on them.
Yeah. Proof of concept.
Yeah, obviously. So anyways, back on drones. All right. So I had a segue though on the humanoids, because I do think that is I mean, that's happening.
Right.
And they're going to be everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're probably going to be like doing your dishes and stuff. I mean, I don't know. Like they're probably going to be in consumer purchases. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there might be infantry in the future. The dogs, at least.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Have you guys studied the dogs?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the dogs work great. I mean, the challenge becomes what's their endurance? How long can they go? So for places like Ukraine, where the battle lines are generally pretty tight and you're not having to travel very far, they'd be great. I mean, they could certainly make a difference in terms of moving stuff around, decoys, electromagnetic decoys. So you could create a lot of false signals that now the ELINT systems that the other side's using are going to have to get flooded with. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to use those. I think for the U.S. Army, they're going to say, well, we're trying to operate over longer ranges and we try to be more on the move. And, is that thing going to be more of a liability, than an asset?
Mm-hmm.
But they're obviously investing in these systems. But I think most of their UGVs are wheeled or tracked so they can try to get higher speeds.
Yeah. On the drone swarm stuff, obviously swarm is like a tactic. It's not not a product.
Right.
So like, there's just a lot of drones.
Right.
And so you mentioned a couple of countermeasures for that, maybe like electronic warfare or EW, obviously kinetic interceptors. I've heard other larger drone swarms.
Right.
Like, what are some of the studies you guys have been looking at there?
Yeah, so we found that against these large numbers of drones, that the high power microwave is really effective, but there's a lot of deconfliction problems, right? So if I start blasting away with a high power microwave signal, whatever's behind it is also going to get blasted. So if I'm in a place like a operating base or an air base or an airport, I can't just go blasting away with.
By the way, I love the word blast. As much as we gotta get blast. I actually think I'm the one who introduced it to the industry. I did when I first started the company. I started yelling blasting all the time. Now, everyone's using it.
That's good. Yeah, that's
I started it. Okay, so EW.
So EW, but it's got its limitations. So we're finding that actually the best way to do it is to bring in some counter drone drones. Basically, I need to have drones that are going to go up and take these drones out because of the confliction that comes with electronic warfare and the kinetic system. Same deal, right? So if I'm going to use a gun to shoot down drones, aerial drones, then I've got all these rounds going down range, which if it's a 50 cal, you're talking, a half a mile, these rounds are coming down, which that's a problem. So we find that these drone on drone action is what you're going to have to rely on to deal with it, even when you're talking about drone swarms. And so that's why things like Roadrunner were interesting, maybe too expensive.
It's not going to hit a swarm of these though.
Right.
I'm talking about what do you do with a swarm of DJI Mavics?
Yeah. Well, I think you...
all with a 2 kilogram bomb on it.
Right.
Each one. So what do you do with 100 of those, I guess?
Right. I think you're going to you'll have to hit them with electronic warfare. You're going to have to, if that's the kind of threat you're facing, then you're going to have to accept the collateral damage that comes with either using high power microwave to take out their electronics and have them all fall, or use guns. But probably high power microwave is going to be your only solution.
You think that's going to work? I've heard a lot of, Palmer Lucky's talked about how it's easy to shield against that. You
can shield it, but then again, you do a back and forth, right? So if you're going to shield your DJI Mavic against high power microwave, you're now going to have to make some modifications to it. You got to make it more expensive. You got to do all that work, but you can. So you're right. You could shield them all against that, and then mount your attack just the same. But then I think you get into.
I think it's probably. I think it's actually. I don't know. I might have to push back. I think it's probably only like $10 per drone to shield against it. I think it's actually real. I think HPM might be not very good. I don't know though. I mean, we'll find out.
It's pretty good, but I think you have to put a Faraday cage around the electronics because you got to protect not just the necessarily the microelectronics, but also the servo motors might be susceptible. So now you got to think about, well, what am I shielding? So I think it's a Faraday cage around the guidance control computer is probably the minimum. Yeah. But you might have to go back beyond that depending on how you've built the rest of the drone.
What about I guess the other thing with that is, what if let's say I'm going to use props.
Yeah.
The high power microwaves here kind of point it up.
Yeah.
And they just come from right here.
Right. Right. So then either you got to have multiple directions of coverage. Now I got to buy multiple high power microwave systems.
Full 360.
Right. So full 3. Yeah. So
then top attack.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one alternative. And then the other alternatives, you got to go to guns, right? Because I think, and you probably have to have a combination, right? So you're going to probably, have your high power microwave and you almost need the gun as a backup.
To protect, the gun to protect the high powered microwave, maybe.
Potentially. Right.
Actually, maybe that's all it's doing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But you need a backup, right? Because you're right. You may find out that these drones are shielded, and I'm not getting the same effect with my high power microwave. And they're autonomous. They don't need a radio signal, so I'm not able to jam it. So and there are probably too many of them to try to do a drone on drone sort of counter swarm, operation. So I get to the gun. You're back to guns.
That makes sense. One idea that I was listening to a lot of the Army customers talk about is using interceptors to hit quadcopters. Right. And I thought that'd be very expensive. But maybe they have some sort of like small interceptors they're working on. I mean, it seems like it's tough though.
Yeah, they are. So a while ago they started working on, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but they're small interceptors though. So they're like a PKWS sized interceptors. So these are the rockets that a helicopter might carry. So they're 3 inches in diameter or smaller, like a Zuni rocket.
Yeah.
Which with a guidance system, they can go after these drones and they're pretty cheap.
But it might be hard. The physics of that is going to be tough.
Right. So
it's a small interceptor. So you have so much maneuvering.
Right. It's only going to have so much kinematic, maneuverability.
Yeah.
It's got only so much energy on board. So if it has to maneuver a lot and then go a longer distance, it might not have enough juice to get all the way to the target.
Believe it or not, I actually get a lot of pitch decks from founders trying to get me to angel invest that send me stuff like that defies physics.
Yeah.
And I'm like, honestly, it looks sweet though.
Right. I'm sure it looks great. Yeah. But yeah, the kinetic interceptors, I think the problem is that they just use, it's hard to pack enough at the price point. At the price point you're looking at, can I pack enough maneuverability, speed, and range, to be useful?
Yeah.
And I think it quickly gets into a relatively expensive proposition, especially if you're going after a swarm. So that I think it comes down to guns end up being the best way to do it. The Navy's been doing some of that.
With
even the 5-inch gun. Radar guided gun could be pretty effective at taking these out as long as you got enough guns to handle the swarm.
I would also say not just to plug guns. Obviously, I'm biased because I make the guns, but I was also thinking I had the Neros. It's a startup. Have you heard of Neros? It's like a small startup in California. That's the Anduril Bolt.
Yeah,
it's like a new FPV. It looks sick. Yeah,
right.
So the Neros makes something like that.
Oh, okay.
And they were on the podcast. The CTO was great kid. He says that the only way to combat a swarm is with just a larger swarm, which kind of in some ways makes sense because you got 10,000 drones coming out. 10,000 this way and just hit each other. Go at it.
No, definitely that's one way to handle it. Which I agree that's going to be an effective approach. And that may be the only way to do it when you get up to the 10,000 drone range, right? Because guns will not be able to handle it probably unless you have just
the guns are going to be supporting the ones that get through.
Right,
it's
the
kind
leakers.
Of, we always say the guns are, a lot of times we view them as a last line of defense.
Yeah.
But I think if you're trying to meet them out in the battlefield,
I think that's the best way to get a standoff defense is maybe with drones. But I think interceptors are just, they can do it, but I think it's just it's difficult to do it at a price point that makes it attractive enough.
Yeah, I think interceptors are a total losing game.
Right.
I think obviously a Coyote, Roadrunner, these are very great products.
Right.
But not really for this application.
Yeah.
You're really going to want something much cheaper.
Yeah. That's what you might use to go after a Shahed 136 if it's coming your way. Then you're not your cost exchange is pretty acceptable.
We had a good idea where you have the Roadrunner going out to intercept a Shahed, and then it escorts it in.
Yeah.
And then you shoot it.
Right.
But if you miss it, it hits
exactly.
it.
Yeah.
Because the Roadrunner can actually land and come back to
be used.
Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah. Right. Well, I thought that was a great part of it. So the price point is less of a factor if you're going to be able to recover it. And it's precise enough that you wouldn't waste it. Hopefully, it wouldn't go off and miss the target and then be gone. So I think, definitely an attractive proposition. Just would you have enough of them to deal with a swarm? And I think that's the problem you run into.
Yeah. So I do conceptually agree with you though. You need some sort of area of effect.
Yeah.
So the microwave provides an area of effect.
Right.
Other things that provide an area of effect, I guess EW provides
EW
it. But you have to really point it a lot of times. You got to get the energy on target.
But right, because you have to get the geometry right so that you're actually hitting the antenna.
Yeah.
That's attempting to communicate. Or the drone doesn't need communications. That's the problem that you end up with is the drone, if it's dependent upon GPS, obviously you can jam GPS just like the Russians do, which works. Or you can go after the control signal if it's an FPV drone. But to hit those FPV drones, you got to be able to generate enough power on the target or on the antenna, which the geometry may not be able to do that. So it just means you have to jack up the power because you're not able to get optimal positioning regarding the target antenna.
That makes sense. Jack, pull up. Speaking of GPS denied stuff, you mentioned you were studying that.
Yeah.
Pull up Vermeer. Now this is where I will pump. This is where I pump. VERMEER. I'm an investor in this company. Pump. They do GPS denied. That's probably it. No. Do Vermeer and then GPS denied. Yeah. Check that out. All right. These guys are a pluggable component for GPS denied. So I think the way GPS denied works, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like they use like MapR data or like terrain data.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways. So
this allows a drone to operate in a GPS denied environment.
Right. So you use terrain mapping and cameras to basically figure out where you are, look at the road network, look at the terrain, and then be able to make it the last part. Because normally GPS jamming is not very long or wide area because it's you got terrain, you got foliage. It's hard to jam in that L band or 1 to 2 gigahertz band over a wide area without running into some kind of interference. So your jamming signals are usually pretty localized, which means when you're coming into the target, they normally jam around the thing that's the target. So you'll lose your GPS signal the last few kilometers. Yeah. Which means you'll miss the target. But if you have something like this, you can quickly have it pivot to using the camera to get that last few miles in. Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, we thought this was cool because I think the drone market, it's like kind of saturated. It's pretty saturated. It's hard to enter. Even for my company, I wouldn't do it just because it's so competitive.
Right.
But I kind of like these pluggable components. They can sell to all the drone makers and make them their customer. So that's kind of the angle. So VCs, if you're listening, just throw them a term sheet. Right. Give me a markup. Give me a taste. Just need a little markup.
That's right. That's a great idea, though. I mean, because you could. There's lots of ways to try to get after this GPS denied environment. So this is one way. Wow.
Okay, this is totally sturdy. You're
fine. Yeah, okay, good. So this is one way. The other way is using, I guess, a combination of this and AI, to be able to predict where I am. So if I lose GPS, but I've got my terrain mapping camera, and I can maybe use an ELINT sensor to figure out where cell phone towers are around me, I can put all that together and using AI predict where I am in the world, and then just apply that until I can get GPS back to reconfirm my location.
Yeah.
So there's lots of good ways to use new technology to be able to get through these GPS denied environments, but you got to modify the system to do it. And we haven't built Excalibur or Gimlers or any of these rounds that we're giving to the Ukrainians to do that kind of modification. So that's why they're screwed right now.
Well, we probably need to help them. Yeah. But we'll see. I mean, maybe peace is happening. I don't know.
That's right. Maybe peace will break out.
That would be great, honestly. I don't know. We were talking to some people in Poland for the gun turrets we sell, and they're gearing up no matter what. Yeah. They're regardless. They're on it right
We're
now.
not going to stand by and let us become next.
Just happened too close to them, and they're like, no. Yeah. They don't like this.
Yeah. Well, they've had stuff come down in their territory already. Yeah. So it's just the kind of overflow, they're getting the collateral stuff in their neighborhood from what's going on inside of Ukraine.
So how much time do you think we have to retool our weapons? Are we good? We're not going to get overrun, right?
Oh no, I think we've got maybe 3 years to get our act together in terms of retooling. But in terms of modifying weapons to be able to handle these GPS denied environments, to be able to get up to the scale we need for a modern conflict. Yeah, we got 3 years to be able to come up with a different or a complementary portfolio of weapons that are able to handle the fight that we're likely to have, as opposed to the fight we were planning for.
Okay, yeah, that's probably just because China's not good at war, I guess. Because why don't they just hit us now? I mean, they got all the drones.
Well, so the way that Chinese leaders talk about it is they're just not confident in the ability of their forces to execute. Because they just don't have that kind of a combat experience or the operational experience.
How do you know that? That you read their, you read their
right?
Yeah.
So they're Chinese leaders. They call it the 5 incapables. But there's a series of things that Xi and other military leaders in China have said that they don't feel confident in their forces being able to do, like manage a fight that's complex, or operate without oversight from senior leaders, or operate in communications denied environment. So those are things that they have said themselves they're not really ready for. And that's in part why you've seen this reticence on their part to take advantage of what might be a period of vulnerability in the United States.
Nice. That's good for us.
Yeah.
If we take them at their word.
Right.
Which I think we probably should.
Yeah, it seems it seems logical to think that a country
they're not like a war-fighting country. Yeah,
right. And the last war they fought was in '79 against Vietnam, and the Vietnamese almost won that conflict. So they lost 60,000 soldiers against the Vietnamese in that fight.
Yeah, they're not like us. We're always in the random skirmishes.
Exactly.
And
stuff. We're always getting into some kind of dust up with somebody.
Yeah. We like violence.
That's right.
We're always doing something.
Yeah. I mean,
China doesn't have that same, like, it's like battle readiness.
Right.
Is really what we're talking about.
Right.
Like they feel like, yeah. Which I can see that, actually. I can definitely see that.
So that's why you kind of have this sort of...
Because we're fucking crazy.
Right.
Like we're
well, we use a lot of mission command. We send, commanders out there to do things on their own. We expect a 03 to 05 command, person to be able to execute without, commander's intent, without any comms with home office. And in China, they don't do that, right? They're not confident in their ability to have commanders go off and independently act and succeed, without somebody from home being able to tell them what to do.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, their culture is very top-down management style, as we know.
Right. And so that's all led to this idea of a very centralized approach to warfare, right? They want to be able to launch a bunch of missiles from China using space-based sensors and hit, hundreds of targets like ships out in the East and South China Sea. That's the kind of approach they want to take.
I have a theory. This totally is Steve made up shit, but like they mostly are just into business. Like they love selling this stuff. Yeah. Like the Unitree robot. Yeah. They love selling these. Yeah. Like we had a China expert on. What was her name? The China. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we had a China expert on recently, and she was showing me the import exports of defense systems. Yeah. And China's are like growing the most. Like they're just exporting. And selling.
They just love selling. Yeah.
And they love money. Because like whenever they always email me like asking to like do manufacturing for us or like help, and they're so nice about it.
Yeah.
Like there's so like one of the things is like Sun Tzu Art of War type shit is like they're just trying to make some money.
Right.
They love it.
Look, we shouldn't read too much more into it than that, probably.
I mean, really, they like it, and like they're getting rich off of it. Yeah. And they're starting to sell. Like that used to be our thing. Like we used to export all the weapons. Yeah. And we still do. We're the leader.
Right.
But like percentage-wise, they're growing fast.
Yeah.
And like maybe why even fight a war when you can just get rich?
Yeah. I mean, meanwhile we're on the sideline.
That's my theory.
Doing our own thing. Yeah.
That's my theory. They're not even going to fight. They're just like, it's all like a backdrop. Like, oh, we might fight. Right. But actually just buy our drones.
It's kind of a jobs program, R&D program.
Crushing it.
It's just a place we can do, our business.
I mean, do you guys study that kind of like alternate warfare? Like not a hot war, just like beat us at everything else.
Oh yeah. No. Yeah, we've got people at Hudson that are doing that kind of research right now to say this is really an economic fight. I mean, part of the discussion we had on the Senate, Commerce Committee today was about the fact that this is a commercial fight and a military fight. So we're competing in both realms, and we gotta be able to do both. And China theoretically has to do both, but in a lot of cases it's easy for them because of the home team, right? So if they're going to have any sort of war over Taiwan, they're fighting from home. It's a lot easier for them.
It's way easier.
Yeah, so they don't have to be quite as sophisticated or as capable as we do to be able to fight as the away team.
Have you been to Taiwan recently?
Not recently. So I think we're going to go there this year.
You got to go.
Check things out. Yeah.
I think like my business partner went. He wanted to go before he couldn't anymore. Is what he said. But apparently it's beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely is. Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
That's cool. What other? So besides Taiwan, what are any other stated goals that they have to expand like down in the South China Sea? Or
so they've built these islands in the South China Sea that they're using to sort of control traffic down there. They're getting they've had a lot of disagreements recently with the Philippines because there's some of these features are also in territory that the Philippines technically owns. So there's been a lot of clashes between Chinese and Chinese military forces and Coast Guard forces and Philippine fishermen and Philippine Coast Guard. So
they want the fish.
They want the fish, right?
Yeah.
They want to be able to get the fish, but they also want to show the Philippines that this is Chinese territory and that they're going to exert their control over it. Unless the U.S. wants to come in and defend its ally, the Philippines, which we have not yet.
Can we just give them the fish?
So they've been aggressively mounting this illegal and unregulated fishing effort over the last decade.
Well, they overfish.
Right. They go and overfish in other people's fishing grounds, which means now if you're the Philippines, your fishermen are now...
But they're hungry.
Right. Exactly. Right. But there's other ways they can get their protein, I guess, other than going into somebody else's fishing grounds and taking all their fish.
That'd be hilarious if Trump makes like a great fish treaty.
That's right.
That brings world peace. They just wanted the fish all along.
It's all just about the fish.
The great fish treaty. I mean, in some ways, it is about feeding the people.
Right.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't do that, that's job number one, right?
Yeah.
If you fail at doing that, you've got, that was the, in the Middle East, the Arab Spring, in a lot of cases,
they're mad.
Was coming out of that, right? Coming out of the fact that food was too expensive.
And when they get hungry, people get pissed off.
That's right.
So like there
People
is an
get the
element.
streets.
Like I joke about the fish, but like honestly, like they want more territory.
Right.
So they have more resources.
Right.
Yeah. Just I mean, it's all like StarCraft stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
Yeah.
obvious.
Yeah. Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what in the then the alternate war type scenario, you said you have a whole team on that, or like you have?
Yeah. So we've there's a group at Hudson that's looking at the economic and trade and financial dimension of this to see how is it not just what China's doing to see what that looks like, but also what can we do, right? If we want to push back on China, but we don't want to do it militarily, what are the tools that we have? Can we? Obviously, the Trump administration is going to use trade. But there's also, we could do targeted sanctions against some of the Chinese leadership or some of their investments. There's a lot of ways we could use the U.S. control of the financial system and our control of the exchange processes to exert a lot of influence over China. So it's not just a matter of, is China winning this fight because they're dominating us commercially and economically. It's also, what are the tools we have to be able to mount that same kind of fight? And I think now you're seeing a lot of that kind of play out. I think the Trump administration is going to be a lot more interested in that and maybe using the uncrewed systems and the new technologies to kind of deter the military fight, but not really fight it, and then focus most of their effort to actually push back on China in these non-military domains.
Which I think would be great.
Yeah.
'Cause,
Less fighting.
Well, first of all, a big war would totally suck. Like
it would. Yeah.
I mean, I've never grown up. I didn't grow up in I didn't have a big war. Like, I don't think you were around World War II either.
No.
So we've never really had like a great war.
Yeah.
But so I don't think people realize how bad it would suck, but it would be horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. People are a little bit too flip with talking about starting a war with China. And I think if we can use these new technologies to help deter a war and keep China from making a mistake and going after Taiwan or Japan or whatever, let's focus the competition in the economic and the trade and the information domain. At least lots.
Yeah, that seems a little bit better.
Yeah, fewer people die that way.
So talk to me about a little bit. So for Hudson, like relative, is this like a large think tank?
So it's like 120 scholars, researchers.
Is that a lot for a think tank?
I think it's pretty. It's like
one of the big ones.
It's one of the bigger ones,
okay.
right? It's not the biggest ones like CSIS and Brookings, and Carnegie. So
what's like annual budget?
I think it's in the $30 million range. Okay. So it's not huge, but it's in the middle, right?
That's pretty big.
It's on the bigger end of the middle, if you will.
So you basically a high level, just for the listeners, it's like, let's just call it 30 million.
Yeah.
So it'd be like, that goes to like salaries, to like research, to like, okay.
Right.
And then you provide these products to obviously the different branches of the military and Congress.
So for my research center, about a third of my work is done for the DOD, and then about a third of it's done with private donations, and about a third is paid for by foundations. Nonprofit foundations fund us to do research. So it works to be about a third.
Okay. Any impact from the DOGE?
Not yet. No. So actually, we're doing probably more research because of the DOGE effort, because they want to try to figure out what's the most efficient ways to invest our defense
the DOGE
dollars.
is like using data?
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, or the department is, right?
Yeah.
So the DOD is using data to try to make their best argument. And I think they might come to us because we're a cheaper alternative than using some of the normal contractors they go to.
All right, because the media has me believing they're just willy-nilly axing things. I don't know. I can't believe everything you read, but
yeah, I think they may be, but I think what's happening is the department or the DOD is like last in line, right? So they've seen what's happened in these other departments, and they said, well, let's get ahead of it. Let's do some research on what we think the best things to offer up might be as cuts. So they're trying to get ahead of it.
Yeah. Well, they could maybe cut like some of the. Well, there's a lot. It's tough because of some of the stuff, like legacy, like things we buy, like some tanks. Like we just keep buying them. For the jobs and stuff like that.
Right. So there's a lot of kind of employment baked into these things that it's like they're like tank. We don't know if we're really buying tanks right now, but we're certainly upgrading tanks. Like there's a whole tank renovation project going on that costs billions. And then we're buying new helicopters, and helicopters that we've seen in Ukraine are not really that survivable.
Dude, a helicopter is terrible now.
Right. So the helicopter is not a great investment. So I think they're going to be looking at trying to cancel this it's a tilt rotor aircraft, but it's a helicopter program that the Army just started. So it'd be a great thing to
tilt rotor. Is that like VTOL?
Like VTOL, right? Or like the Osprey, like the NV-22.
I hate those. Yeah, VTOL is terrible. Haven't you not in the think tank written about how VTOL is terrible?
Right. Yeah.
Why don't have you read?
Yeah. We have. We've talked about that.
You have. Okay, great.
Yeah. So
See, I'm not the only one. The think tanks, but the military loves VTOL.
Oh, because it's cool. Because
They love it.
Now it's, in theory, it's useful because, I can take off from any place and land any place, and then I can travel like an airplane at high speed and long range.
So bad.
Right. But so you got these mechanical problems, and how reliable are they? They're very, and the problem in Ukraine we've seen is basically anything that's like a helicopter gets shot down. So you can't, so I think that's something that the DOGE will be looking to cut, and the DoD is probably looking at ways to offer that up as a potential cut and save other things that they might want to protect.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on hypersonics?
I think so. For the U.S., hypersonics are actually not that great an investment. The issue being you have to have a target, right? So a hypersonic weapon is, generally they're going to be pretty expensive, and they're at least the boost glide ones that we're building now that are kind of...
Who's building those? Like Lockheed or something? Or
I think Lockheed, yeah.
So you're not a big proponent of these. This is hot take. Let's talk about it. No, I agree with you. So let's do it. Let's do it.
Right, because I'm like, so they're pretty expensive. They're pretty big. So
do they even work?
Well, they work. They certainly work. The question would be, if I'm going to use this missile, it's going to cost, I don't know, $20 to $30 million or more. I need to shoot it at something really important. Well, if I'm going up against China, what is they have thousands of really important things I could shoot at. And I have to put this thing onto a ship, or I've got to put it onto an airplane and cart it out there and then launch it.
Oh, you can't do it from our continent?
No. Right. So these, the ones that they're building right now are not intercontinental range. They're intermediate range, means I have to launch them from like 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles away. So I got to put them on a ship, or I got to put them in a ground unit. So an Army group has to go out there to the Philippines and park themselves,
and they're expensive.
Or whatever. And they're expensive.
And so what are we hitting? Something that's less expensive.
Right. So you could attack some like command and control compound maybe, but China has hundreds of those. So which ones do I shoot at? So China, though, is making the same kinds of investments, and they're going to shoot them at our ships. And I'd be like, okay, well, that's a good cost exchange. If you can use a couple of these hypersonic weapons
on a carrier strike group,
right, and take out a destroyer, or maybe disable a carrier, that's billions of dollars of investment that is now disabled, right? So for the cost of whatever, $30 million.
So they're good for our enemy, but not great for us as much.
Because we're the away team. So when we're carrying this stuff with us, one, there's a tax because you got to carry all these missiles and they're big and expensive. And then two, I got to have something to shoot at that is worth the investment in that missile. And for China, they do, because we have to bring our ships there and our air bases, our aircraft, our bombers, and they can shoot at those, and they're pretty expensive. But we are just going to be shooting at Chinese, bases across their territory. So we don't have a target to shoot at that's nearly as worthwhile as what they have to shoot at.
That's hot. Hey, this is a short. The hypersonic discussion. That's some good info. People love this shit. I like that. What about contested logistics?
Yeah, so contested logistics are something we look at. I think that the problem ends up being the logistics forces get attacked. That's who they're going to go after first, right? So you need to devote a lot of defense to those logistics forces. And at a certain point, it becomes so much investment in defenses of the logistics that I'm not really putting enough forces at the front line anymore. So I got to come up with ways to get logistics downrange that don't demand a bunch of overhead to be able to protect them, which means you got to go to like smaller and maybe uncrewed stuff for contested logistics. And I got to make my stuff less dependent upon logistics trains.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on this. I don't know, to really get down into it. Mm-hmm. So like it's a shipping container I've seen with 3D printers in it.
Yeah. It
seems kind of like kludgy. Like it's like, is that really a weapon of war that we're going to be using? We're going to be... No. It just seems kind of odd, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, and it's, then you got to have all the materials for it. And I can send the software downrange to be able to 3D print.
People say that I can make any part, dog.
It's like,
and then I'll have any part I need.
Right, except I got to have the right metals and materials to make the part out of the 3D printer. So yeah, I've got the printer, but there's a bunch of stuff I got to feed into it that's probably specialized or
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, but they're saying they have all that now.
Right,
it's in the shipping container. It's all in there.
It's all in the shipping container. Yeah, and then there's then you got to install it. Where am I going to take the ship apart to be able to install this part? It just starts to get, or like, do I have a depot where I can run aircraft and tanks and stuff through?
Their argument saying is that, and I don't know if I agree with this argument, their argument would be that the island is surrounded, right, and we can't get any supplies there.
Right.
But I don't know if I believe that.
Right. So if you're in a situation where you're being blockaded and you can't get anything, it seems like well, then why aren't they? If they're
the island's over, you're dead then.
Right. I mean,
You're
why are
pretty
they
much
not
dead.
attacking you on the island then? I mean, if they're blockading you to the point where you cannot get in anything or in or out, then you have to fight, right? And so,
you
or they're
lost.
right. So what's the point in trying to
I
get
know,
a
that's what I-
long
that
term
was my
sustainment?
point.
Like, how long do you intend to be in that situation? And if you're going to be in that situation a long time, the kind of a lower level concern is parts. A higher level concern is like food, and am I even going to keep those people there, or am I going to seek a solution?
And so, like, this is my problem with contested logistics. I don't understand the war scenario.
Right. So normally when we think about it from the Navy, it's how do I get oilers in to refuel ships when the ships are kind of in the contested area and they're getting shot at, and you don't want to have the oiler get shot at. So do you move the ships out to a place that's safe, and then you bring the oil to them or the fuel to them out there, and then they go back in? Or do you try to protect the logistics ship until it gets to the point where they can meet up? Same with like refueling tankers.
Yeah.
So that to me, that's like a case study that makes sense. And then you just got to work out a scheme to reduce the number of times you got to bring the oiler in there, and then come up with a place you can do the tanking in a safe location. But yeah, it's other than that, it's hard to think about how you would need to bring a lot of stuff into a place like the Philippines to resupply Marine units, right? Because if they're in there and the fight starts, they're ready to just be stuck there. They aren't expecting anybody to come in and bring them supplies.
So, wow, this is awesome. You're knowledgeable about a wide range of topics, so I'm going to keep going. This is awesome. Lasers.
Right.
You guys talk about lasers?
Oh, yeah. So lasers, I think, are kind of oversold as a technology for missile defense in particular. And because the problem is you can only shoot like the gun. You can shoot one thing at a time with the laser. The problem is you got to shoot at it for a long time, right? So I got to laze the target for long enough to get the energy deposition.
Yeah, and it's got to be on there a while. Yeah.
Right, and I got to see I got to see some effect, right? So it's not like shooting it where you can immediately get some response. I got to laze it and then see, okay, am I burning through whatever the shielding is or whatever?
And if you're not, they have some sort of reflective coating,
right?
And then you're like, what do I do?
Right, and you're like, so if you have to laze something for 5 or 6 seconds or 10 seconds to see any sort of response, which normally is the case with a missile or a rocket, well, that means I'm only shooting, if a salvo's coming in, how many things can I shoot in the time the salvo is within range? The laser's also line of sight, so I can't shoot over the horizon with it, which means I can only shoot things once they get within over the horizon, which means maybe 10 miles.
Yeah, exactly. And like for our longer ranges, we have like these things, proximity rounds.
Right.
Like they can guided rounds,
Right.
and the bigger gun, they can go over the
Right. So you can guide those to the target. They can maneuver around to be able to meet up with the target if it turns out that you weren't the right location. But the laser, it's a straight shot. So you're going to start lasing and hopefully you hit the target, but you got to keep it on there long enough to be able to.
The lasers feel sci-fi.
We've
been talking about lasers for like 50 years.
Right.
Still never hit the battlefield.
Right. Lots of lasers. I mean, there are lasers that are out there, but we've kind of found that they have limited utility because you can shoot one thing at a time. And if you're getting a drone swarm of anything more than 5 or 10 drones, you're only going to get a couple of them before the swarm is on you.
It's tough. It's tough. I think that they're eventually, it's like Mean Girls, like stop trying to make lasers happen. It's not going to happen. No, but I do think, at some point someone will figure something out with lasers. Yeah. I'm not quite sure yet. One of the things we're playing around with is just as an attachment on the gun is have a camera dazzler where it's not it's just trying to dazzle the camera.
No, that's good.
So
that's a great application of lasers.
It's like a layer of defense where you have the gun's the main thing, but then like maybe you can dazzle it.
Well, especially against like FPV drones, right? So that's the way you dazzle. So if you've got a GPS jammer and they turn to the FPV drone to guide it into the target, you've got a dazzler. Okay, now you're getting to the point where the other side is going to have a hard time building a drone that's able to address all those threats.
Yeah, I'm having a laser startup tomorrow on the podcast.
Oh, cool.
It's called Aurelius, and I think it's going to be pretty good. I'm going to rumble with him and make fun of his laser. But no, I want him to defend it because I think he's onto something. I think they got something, but
you got to deal with this geometry problem, right? Yeah. I mean, the main thing is, and you got to feel out what's the target you're going after, because if you're going to use the laser for missile defense, the targets you're going after are hardened already, right? Because they're missiles. They're designed to go through the air at pretty high speed. They probably got some kind of front end optical component that is already designed to have light energy being pushed through it. So you got to overcome that for the laser to be an effective weapon against it. But if you go after a softer target, then maybe put it on a drone and have the drone carry it out to be able to get a more favorable geometry against the target, or you can go over the horizon and start shooting stuff. Well, then it might work a lot better.
I mean, you got to come into the lion's den.
Yeah.
defend your
That's
product.
Right. Exactly.
I'm a real tough host. Ask the hard cutting questions.
The hard questions. That's right.
I had another one on trying to think. Oh, the Switchblade.
Yeah.
Loitering munitions.
Right.
They seem sick.
Yeah. So they've been a huge. So what's interesting is that talking to folks that have come back from Ukraine is the U.S. loitering munitions have been a lot less favored by the Ukrainian forces than their homegrown ones, because the U.S. ones are they're high end, right? They're sophisticated. They're designed to do exciting maneuvers, and they're supposed to be able to detect and use AI to be able to get around threats and make their way to the target, right? So they're pretty sophisticated. And these guys are like, I don't need something that's going to be able to go 20 clicks, 30 clicks, 40 clicks and maneuver around a bunch of threats. I need something that I can fly 3 clicks and hit the target. And they just go to the FPV drones because they're like, this is a lot more. And also the Switchblade depends on GPS in some cases. So now I'm having to worry about GPS jamming. So they have those, like, the Phoenix Ghost and the Switchblade and the Altius, but they reserve those for the higher end targets. So they'll be like, I'm going to do essentially a standoff attack, their version of a standoff attack, and I'll use these higher end drones to go after those standoff targets. And then they turn to the FPV drones for a lot of the day-to-day sort of back and forth.
Are they having success with the higher end Switchblade type stuff?
Yeah,
but
definitely.
It's just more seldomly used.
It's just it's more complicated for them to do the mission planning and to manage the operation, whereas the FPV drone that uses essentially a cell phone and a homemade drone is a lot simpler to get out to the front lines, and you could get a lot more of them out there.
And plus, like, if they mess up, they're not out much.
Right. So they treat the Switchblade and the Phoenix Ghost and these Altius drones as sort of the higher end capability they use against the bigger targets. So they go against a mortar position or a missile battery with one of those. Whereas if you're looking at a little ground troop formation, you might use your FPV drone.
Oh, okay. That's the market map right there. That's the market map. What other what am I missing? What have I not covered in the new age of products? I feel like we've done a nice survey.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. We got what else you got?
So in the undersea, there's a lot of undersea drones.
Undersea. We didn't get undersea.
There's this new Vatten, which builds undersea drones. Very interesting, because the challenge with undersea drones is that obviously no comms and hard comms. And it's a hard environment. So most of the drones that exist are pretty high end, long lasting, non-expendable, like they're millions of dollars piece, right? So you're not going to you wouldn't want to use them in an expendable sort of drone swarm. But Vatten is building these drones at a much lower price point for the purpose of being expendable.
It's like an expendable underwater torpedo type thing. It's like a self-driving torpedo.
Right, self-driving torpedo that is fairly long endurance. So it's like most torpedoes use an engine that runs at high speed, but burns itself out within 30 minutes at the most. The Vatten drones are designed for longer endurance with more moderate speeds. So
would they come off the back of the Saronic boat?
Yes.
You just drive the boat?
Yep. So you can drive them off. So we had them at a war game we did in Japan. We had Vatten and we had Saronic there. And that was one of the ideas they talked about is, can we have the Saronic boat dump a bunch of these Vatten drones out? They go out and attack ships with these
so
small
that'll
torpedoes.
actually end up being the more expendable thing.
Right.
Which just makes more money.
Right.
Really, then Saronic, think about it.
Right.
From an investor standpoint.
Oh, yeah. And so these, even these small torpedo drone, hybrids are pretty effective because, again, sea pressure does a lot of the work for you, because you put a hole below the waterline on a ship, the sea pressure is going to push through and damage the ship a lot more, damage the hull a lot more. Whereas if you hit it on the, above the waterline in the superstructure with an Altius drone, it damages the ship.
It's not the same.
Right.
So that actually is very interesting. That means Saronic's going to need to buy one of these, because they can't. They have to own it for that valuation.
Yeah, to me that's a great way to turn that Saronic into a platform, that's able to carry other smaller useful drones. Right.
So then the question becomes, how does Vatten not just sell to them versus get out from underneath and become a prime? That's the game for investors. That's the VC. That's the way they think. They're like, who's the platform?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's probably the company that makes the most money.
That seems like they're very much interested in just being the payload provider.
Well, being the payload provider can be lucrative.
Yeah, because you buy a lot of them.
But it depends, eventually the platform provider comes for their cut.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In the business world,
right.
Like, who has the power?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Okay. I like how this market, are there other underwater like Vatten competitors right now?
Not really.
No.
Not really. I mean, because most of these companies consolidated. There was a wave of consolidation in that industry maybe 5-10 years ago.
Maybe they started too early.
Right. So, right. I think so. So like there was a Riptide was one company, Bluefin. There were a bunch of these companies, and they sort of got bought up by the bigger undersea drone or undersea UUV companies.
Yeah.
And that now those companies are all building kind of higher end, bigger, more sophisticated drones that are mostly used for like survey and kind of commercial uses in a lot of cases. And then for the military side, the military uses are usually like I'm going to deploy it from a submarine, and so it's got to be really sophisticated. And I can't be a piece of junk, and I have to maybe even recover it onto the submarine. So the bigger drone makers in the undersea world are all focused on these kind of bigger drones that either deploy from the submarine or they're huge drones like Andurils on their own that deploy from the pier. So there's not a lot of companies building these small expendable drones in the UUV space.
Nice. All right. Well, now I may feel like a fool. I had a chance to invest in that. I blew it.
Well, we'll see. It might come around again.
Yeah, maybe.
But
We'll
it'll be a slow start for them, right? Because they got to build
Yeah, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do.
You got to first convince somebody that this concept makes sense. Whereas the drone boats, like the Saronic boats, people get that. They've seen Ukraine.
Yeah.
That all makes sense to them. You got to now convince them that this small UUV is a worthy complement or competitor to that.
Well, maybe they should just fund some research at the think tank.
They could,
but sounds like you just have your. It sounds like from our talk here, though, you just kind of have your own opinions on all of this.
Yeah,
which I like.
Yeah. I mean, we do get funding from some of these companies, but it's more general. Like they'll give us money, like make a donation to us, I guess, for a tax break. So it's not like it's tied to a particular, I guess.
Yeah, it's a gentle hand,
project.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Gentle hand.
Right.
But I mean, you're a man of principle.
Right.
I can tell a lot of the stuff you're thinking about is very aligned with what I'm thinking about. I'm not just trying to be agreeable. It's just very interesting convo today. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm doing this research for the last decade or so. You kind of come to some conclusions about what seems to work and what doesn't.
Yeah. No, it's really amazing. I'm super glad you could come on today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, it's been an amazing time. And I think Jack, let's just move this one up and run this one as soon as possible, obviously, because this is one of the better ones. I like that. All right, dude. It was awesome.